Yeah, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me. There
Guys, my bad.
is. I'm
Duh.
gonna put it. I'll put the link in the chat again.
13.
Okay.
Steve, we are having very difficult internet, so we may be coming in and out throughout
Okay.
you may be admitting us multiple times.
Okay. All right. Understood. All right. I know what that feels like to have difficult internet. Okay. All right. So I did put a link in the chat that should take you, I think it'll take you to the folder, which is the folder for this class, and then you're looking for texts for session 2 of eating as a spiritual activity is what you want to open up. It's a PDF file.
Where did you put this?
If you go to the chat,
Think-
you know and there's a link to take you to the folder for this class.
Okay, thank you.
I'm getting an HTTP error. I can't download it.
Oh, really? What does even that mean, HTTP error?
No, it
Lila,
worked for me.
it worked for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not having any problems.
Okay. All right. You know what? All right. Is everyone else able to download?
Can you put the link in again?
I can. I'm gonna send it to Sue so that she has a copy.
Okay.
Um,
I can keep putting it in the
okay, that's
chat
great.
as new people join.
That's great. All right, I'm gonna do this. Okay, just put it back in.
Great.
Okay. All right. Welcome everyone to our second session of eating as the sacred dimension of eating in Judaism. And let's start with a blessing, and then I'll do a very brief review from last week, and then we'll dive into this week's content. So may our learning together this evening be an experience that deepens and broadens our understanding of Jewish tradition, and also provides us with maybe some possible connections to this part of our tradition that we may not have felt before. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right. So, I think there are at least a few people here this evening that were not here last week, which is totally fine. And even if you were here last week, it probably doesn't hurt for me to just, I'm just going to give a very general overview. Last week we looked at a bunch of different biblical texts, all from the Torah actually, just the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, nothing from the second or third sections of the Hebrew Bible, and looking at a variety of different ways that food played a sacred role in ancient Jewish culture. So, one thing, in the very beginning of Genesis, we saw this move in the text from the ideal diet being a vegan diet to a post-flood where being carnivorous for human beings, in the universe of the Torah, that became permissible after the flood. So being carnivorous has been understood for a long time as a compromise, not the ideal of that Jewish tradition sees and aspires to. And we looked at a few different dimensions that are kind of the roots of the kashrut system, keeping kosher. And I'll say in terms of the summary, that I suggested, and this is not my own idea, it's something that I've heard from a number of other people, that the system of kashrut, of keeping kosher, is in fact, that is what the compromise is with being wholly carnivorous, because it makes eating meat much more difficult in a lot of different ways. It limits the number of species that are allowed to be eaten, and then those if we want to eat a cow or a sheep, it has to be killed in a certain way, has to be slaughtered in a certain way, or else it's not usable. It also has to be well, we're going to get to that. There, we looked at this interesting law that appeared 3 times in the Torah of you not boiling a kid in its mother's milk. So there was something in the Torah about some kind of discomfort with, which is not totally surprising. If you were, cooking a baby goat in its mother's milk, that seems kind of inherently cruel, and the tradition is we'll see this evening where it takes that. So besides kind of all the beginnings of the kashrut system, we also looked at the role that food played at a number of high moments in the life of the community. So there was a story about Abraham unexpectedly winning a military battle against a much bigger army, and when he returns from that battle victorious, there is a Gentile priest who meets him, welcomes him back, and they celebrate with bread and wine, which is kind of interesting. This is from early Genesis. Another way that food played had a sacred role is when people would welcome guests into their home, especially if the guests were in some kind of danger or facing some kind of challenge. That is a sacred way of using food, helping people who are facing some kind of need or challenge. And we also looked a little bit at the whole Passover, the beginnings of the Passover story, and the very important role that certain foods played in the ability for the Israelites to commemorate and to remember and to pass down the powerful experience of being redeemed from slavery. So there was a whole section on matzah that we looked at last week too. So those were kind of the main categories in the biblical context. And then tonight we're going to look at a bunch of different texts from the rabbis, mostly Talmudic, and some of the Talmudic texts come from the Mishnah, which is the older layer of the Talmud, and some come from the Gemara, which is the newer. And when I say older and newer, the Mishnah was written down around 200 CE. The Gemara was kind of finalized around 500 CE. So it's still, they're both pretty old, but the Mishnah is the older of the two, and the Mishnah is really the oldest rabbinic text that we have. If you have the text in front of you and you're willing to do any reading tonight, if you wouldn't mind electronically raising your hand, and I will call on people. And we're gonna. I think last time
Can you share screen? Because
we can try that. I always get nervous about it because then I can't see people very well. And if I share screen, then if you have a question, you have to electronically raise your hand. Otherwise, I won't know.
I will try again, but
Oh, you couldn't get the text?
Trouble too.
I downloaded it, so I'll see if I can get it next to it. But
Oh, okay. Okay. Who else said they were having trouble?
I did. Dorinda. Oh, wait. AB. Okay,
Oh,
wait.
okay.
okay, I'm set,
All
at
right.
least for now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Louise. All right. Here, all right, Dorinda, I'm emailing the text to you if that's any easier. You'll get it as an attachment. Okay, so
Good.
anyone willing to read, if you have it open in front of you, the first text, which is from, it's a Talmudic, it's a Gemara. Okay, oh, Sue, thank you. We got to get you unmuted, though.
Just put it.
Here we go. Okay, I'm
Yeah,
unmuted.
you're good. You're good.
I'm
All right,
unmuted.
go ahead.
Okay, it's Chulin 115b 6. The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, the Torah states 3 times, "You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk." One verse serves to teach the prohibition against eating meat cooked in milk, and one serves to teach the prohibition against deriving benefit from it, and one serves to teach the prohibition against cooking meat in milk.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, so this is these 3 verses, these 3 repetitions of not cooking a kid in its mother's milk. The rabbis do more with this than any other part of the kashrut system. It just absolutely expands exponentially in the rabbinic period, and it starts with this interpretation that first of all, it's not just about a baby goat and its mother, that the baby goat is symbolic of meat in general. The Torah never says that, but that the rabbis assumed that if something was repeated, there must be new information that the Torah was giving us, because otherwise, why repeat it? So it expands meat to all kinds of meat, at least all kinds of red meat, and then there are 3 distinctive prohibitions that the rabbis learn from these 3 repetitions. And so not only the verse says cook, right? You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. It doesn't say if someone else cooks it, you shouldn't eat it. It says you shouldn't cook it. But the rabbis say the 3 prohibitions are we can't cook, we can't eat, and the third one, we can't derive any benefit from doing this activity, from combining, meat and dairy elements. And this is the reason that a traditional Jew cannot own a traditional McDonald's outlet, because that would be benefiting from the combination of milk and meat. That is not the case with any of the animals that are prohibited. It's absolutely fine for a traditional Jew to own a pig farm, for example. That's not prohibited by any of our laws. But the milk and meat combination is the most stringent of all the eating, these kinds of laws. So, okay. And again, I just want to say, anyone, if you have a question or comment, and feel free to raise your hand, and we can take that. Alan Binstock, do you want to read the next text?
Where should I start?
It's Midrash Lekach Tov. So you
Okay.
shall not. Yeah.
You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk, and the law is the same with any beast or wild animal. However, the verse spoke about what is common. Rabbi Yishmael said, "You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk," is stated 3 times, corresponding to the 3 covenants that God made with the Jewish people at Horeb, Sinai, on the plains of Moab, and on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. Rabbi Yochanan said, "One is for beasts, one is for wild animals, and one is for fowl." Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, "One is for the prohibition of eating, one is for the prohibition of deriving benefit, and one is for the prohibition of cooking."
Thank you, Alan. So this is a similar text to the first one we read, but it's different in some interesting ways, I think. And I don't know if anything jumped out at anybody as Alan was reading that, and maybe you were looking at both the first and the second text. And yeah, Kevin?
Well, fowl is mentioned. That suddenly was never mentioned before.
Yeah, that's true. Right. So, and that's a whole thing, right? Whether the meat of kosher birds should be treated like the meat of kosher mammals. Good. Right. So I do want to say it's not clear. This statement, Rabbi Yochanan says, one is for beasts, one is for wild animals, and one is for fowl. So how do you understand that addition, Kevin? What do you think? And I'll tell you why I'm asking after you answer the question.
Well, the only way I can see it is beasts were the domesticated beasts, and the wild animals were the permissible animals that were hunted.
Right. So in this interpretation, each of the 3 repetitions is actually giving us a different category of food that we have to not mix with milk. So I'll say what's interesting is there's another text where Rabbi Yochanan, the same Rabbi Yochanan, seems to be saying that each of those repetitions excludes these categories from the requirement of not mixing them with milk. So there's another place where he says beasts. Well, that doesn't make sense with beasts, actually. Well, maybe you'll see when we get there. When we get to the Gemara on that. Okay, the Rabbi Yishmael is quoted. The school of Rabbi Yishmael was quoted in the first one. They're totally different teachings, right? The school of Rabbi Yishmael was the one in the first text that taught about cooking, eating, and benefit. But in this text, Rabbi Yishmael is saying, no, it has to do with the 3 covenants that were made. So I just thought that was interesting for all of us to see that even the cooking, eating, benefit interpretation was not universal. It was there, it was prominent, but I think what's one of the things that's interesting, and this is true in a lot of different areas of Jewish law, there was fluidity at this point in the development of Jewish culture and Jewish practice, and there wasn't a single way of understanding things or even a single practice. So, good. Okay. That's why I included that. Okay.
I've got questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Lila. Yeah.
So it's always the baby goat in its mother's milk?
Yes.
Can it be cooked in another goat's milk? Could it be cooked in other kinds of milk? Also, birds don't produce milk.
Yeah, that's all good, and there are rabbinic discussions on all of those things, right? Because on the most literal level, you know, if you could follow that law and cook a baby goat in a different mother goat's milk. I mean, that would be, literally following the law. So,
And also, you cook goats by roasting them. I mean, you don't really boil them in the middle. This culture did not boil its meat so much. But okay, I'm
yeah,
done.
yeah. All right, thank you. Thank you for those questions. All right, so let's go now to the third text. Now, this is from the Mishnah now, so this is the older layer of the Talmud. And I just, again, wanted everyone to see that from the oldest layer, these were issues that were active from the earliest time of rabbinic Judaism. Kevin, you want to read?
Okay, got myself unmuted. Mishnah Shulin 8:1. It is prohibited to cook any meat of domesticated and undomesticated animals and birds in milk, except for the meat of fish and grasshoppers, whose halachic status is not that of meat. And likewise, the sages issued a decree that it is prohibited to place any meat together with milk products, that is, cheese on one table. The reason for this prohibition is that one might come to eat them after they absorb substances from each other. This prohibition applies to all types of meat except for the meat of fish and grasshoppers. And one who takes a vow that meat is prohibited to him is permitted to eat the meat of fish and grasshoppers. The meat of birds may be placed with cheese on one table, but may not be eaten together with it. This is the statement of Beit Shammai, and Beit Hillel said it may neither be placed on one table nor be eaten with cheese.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay. Okay. So the rabbis, the rabbinic culture, and this is something I think we know, that they were so deeply focused on the specificity of being accurate and interpreting correctly. And and it's interesting that they refer to the flesh of fish and grasshoppers with the same term as they do with the flesh of mammals and birds. And those fish and grasshoppers are not in the same category. They don't count as meat, and you can eat them with dairy products. But they're even concerned about, it's not even just the eating part. I mean, this is related to eating because it might be accidental eating, but you have to be careful about how you serve items. And, there's a disagreement even of whether you could even put them on the same table. In this case, it's unusual. Usually Shammai is the strict interpretation and Hillel is the more lenient. And here is one of the few cases where that's reversed, where Shammai is more lenient and Hillel is more strict. But this is from the early second century of the Common Era. So this was a live issue. Probably even before the destruction of the Second Temple. Like the rabbis were probably worrying about this stuff even while the temple cult was still in operation. They were kind of like, living alongside each other. Okay. So, and we have a few, this milk and meat thing is really complex and multidimensional, so I brought a few different texts for us to look at. And there's a little bit of a nuance of difference as we move from one to the next. And please, again, questions or comments, just let's stop and stop me, and we'll talk about it. I know there's a lot of this might seem esoteric in some ways because it's not, these are not ways of thinking that very many people outside, not there are people outside the Orthodox community, but it's definitely a small minority that are kind of giving this amount of attention. Okay, let's go to, and you see, I just want to point out, all of the Talmudic texts are from the same volume or the same tractate of Chulin, and that's very much, that's not a coincidence. Chulin, it's related to the word chol in Hebrew, which means like mundane. It's like the daily kinds of things that we do in our lives, and there's a lot of material in this tractate that deals with food and eating, because that's one of the main topics in terms of daily life. So, let's go to the Gemara, the later level of the Talmud, also from Chulin and Alan Fetterman.
Rabbi Akiva maintains that the prohibitions of an undomesticated animal and a bird do not apply by Torah law, but it may be inferred from a statement that they are prohibited by rabbinic law. By rabbinic law, that's
Right.
what I should.
Right.
Yes, okay. And Rabbi Yosei HaGalili maintains that a bird is not prohibited even by rabbinic law. In the locale of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, they would eat bird meat cooked in milk. Evidently, Rabbi Yosef HaGalili maintains that the prohibition of meat cooked in milk does not include birds.
Okay, let's stop there for a second, Alan. Okay, so, again, this is not a text that is familiar to most people, but I think it shows an interesting fluidity, as we were saying, in the practice. There is a respected rabbi who is of the opinion that bird meat should not be in the same category as other, animal meat, big animal, large animal, and he's clearly in the minority, but his opinion is recorded, and his practice is, noted. And it's interesting, too, I think, to note that it's not just him, it's the people who live in his area they follow his practice. So there's a whole region of, and I think this was, we're talking about ancient Palestine here. There was a whole region that, of Jewish people who would, with no issue combine meat and, bird, poultry and dairy, and it was not a problem. And this rabbi said it's not prohibited by either level. The rabbis were also very concerned about distinguishing between something that's prohibited from the Torah and something that the rabbis prohibited. And that's why Rabbi Akiva is making this distinction here. Theoretically, a rabbinic prohibition is not as strong as a Torah prohibition. And if you have to break a prohibition, better to break a rabbinic prohibition than a Torah prohibition. So, but for Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, neither one of those categories apply. Okay, Alan, continue with the next paragraph.
Okay, but let me first raise a...
Sure.
Here. So all of this is about, in a sense, honoring the sacredness of animals that we eat.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good way of, yes.
Yes, and that sacredness was deemed to be violated when you cook an animal in its mother's milk. How did they get from there to worrying about non-mammals. I don't understand how that violates it. It seems like it stretches it beyond the point of relevancy to sacredness. So I don't understand that. I don't know if maybe that's
Yeah.
just a
No, no,
commentary.
no. It's a really it's a well spoken comment, and I think I don't think we have any texts that specifically capture that moment when poultry becomes something that the rabbis want to include in this category. I have seen writings that speculate, and we see this in lots of other areas of Jewish life, where because poultry could be mistaken, maybe for beef, let's say, or for I don't even know what that equivalent term for goat meat is, for mutton, then this is what we call a fence around the law, that technically speaking, it's not really prohibited, but because it might lead people down a path that takes them either inadvertently or even intentionally towards breaking that law of treating a mammal in a non-sacred way. So this is meant to protect, make doubly sure that that doesn't happen by accident.
Steve,
Yeah.
does this mean that if you live in a certain place where it's okay to eat fowl and milk, but if you move from there to Jerusalem, all of a sudden you can't eat fowl and milk anymore? And what laws do we have to apply?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like living in the United States today, and you move from one state to the other, and the laws aren't always the same, right? Sometimes, and maybe many of them are similar, but sometimes the laws are different. So in the ancient world, every rabbi was kind of the legal authority for his community, and his community generally lived around him. And so if the legal authority were to say, my read of the tradition is that this is actually acceptable, then people in his, you're going to see when Alan reads the second paragraph, though, exactly this issue gets brought up in a way, because there's tension, because people in one place have a firm belief in, one interpretation, and then people in a different place. And if you move from the strict place to the lenient place, how do you handle it? So that is, we're going to hear about an example. Catherine, do you have a question?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm new to reading Talmudic texts.
Yes.
And I'm struck by the pronouncements by the different rabbis without explanation or without theory or opinion, or, that this is just how it is. And what does one do with that, sort of looking back at it? So I guess that's the way, we've sort of been talking about how decisions are made, and I assume that these rabbis sort of were able to make these pronouncements and people had to follow. But how do we use that from a retrospective perspective?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So I will say that attitude, or that sense of agency that the ancient rabbis had, is most pronounced at the Mishnah level of the Talmud. I mean, the rabbis of the Gemara also have a lot of agency, but they at least attempt. In this particular text, they're not. But there are usually two methods that the rabbis can use to try to justify their position. One is that they find a verse in the Hebrew Bible that they say backs them up. So that's one thing they can do. Actually, there are three things they can do. That's one thing. The second thing they can do is they can point to other rabbinic colleagues and say, oh, well, my colleagues do this, and so that is why I'm, opining that we should do it as well. And then there was a whole set of Talmudic logic arguments, and they could use those. So they do, at least on the surface, often try to explain their positions, but I think for those of us looking back from the 21st century, sometimes those explanations, may not seem as compelling or weighty as maybe they did to the contemporaries of these rabbis, because people, if people assumed or believed that, every word in the Torah was revealed by God, if a rabbi could point to a verse and say, even maybe this verse supports me, that would carry some weight with people and with fellow colleagues. So thank you for that. But here we're not seeing that yet. I think there will be a couple of texts where we see some attempt at justifying a position. So, but thank you for that. That's a great question. Okay. Do we lose Alan? Oh, Alan, would you do that next paragraph?
The Gemara relates, Levi happened to come to the house of Yosef the bird hunter, Rishpa. They served him the head of a peacock, taivasa, in milk, and he did not say anything to them. When Levi came before Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said to him, why did you not excommunicate these people who eat bird meat cooked in milk, contrary to the decree of the sages? Levi said to him, it was in the locale of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. And I said, perhaps he taught them that the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, who said that the phrase, in its mother's milk, serves to exclude a bird which does not have mother's milk. If so, I could not prohibit it to them, and I certainly could not excommunicate them for following their ruling.
Thank you, Alan. I love this story. I think it's such a great little, vignette. And so Lila, right? There's your argument. And Sue, there's the situation that you described. And Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the prince, he was the head of all the rabbis. He was the head of the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. And he was the main guy at the time. And so the fact that he said, it was clear to him that that Levi should have, and I guess I don't know if it doesn't call him Rabbi Levi. It's interesting, and it's interesting that Judah the prince indicates that Levi had the power to excommunicate people. That's kind of a weird thing too. But yeah. So but there, and peacock's head in milk. I know that's kind of a gross image, but it's just so, it's very. It just makes an impression on you. Catherine and/or Bruce.
Hi, I just wanted to relate a story we ran into when we were in Sfat once, and there was a place that served lox and bagel, and they would put the cream cheese on one half, and the lox on the other half, but they wouldn't put it together. They'd give it to you, so you had to put it together yourself. And I asked the guy why, and he said, because there's another rabbi in town, and he tells his community that you can't have fish and dairy together. So out of respect for them, we don't do it. We don't actually put them together ourselves. And that seems like it's a respectful way. They found a compromise, right? Because there were these two competing rabbinical rulings.
That's great. That's a great story. Yes, and there is a custom. There is a custom of not. It's not a law. You're not. You're not transgressing the Jewish legal system if you eat fish and dairy together. But there is a custom of not doing it, and that's so interesting. That's a great story. That's a great story. Thank you. All right. Okay. So let's turn to the second page here. Okay. Now we're going to get into a different related issue. This is another way that the rabbis expanded this whole legal arena. So firstly, it was, what counts as meat, and if it counts as meat, then it can't be eaten with a dairy product. Okay. Anyone? This is also from Chulin, a different page of the Gemara and Chulin. Anyone who hasn't read, willing to read this? And I'll read it if no one wants to. Okay.
I'll read it.
Okay, thanks, Audrey.
So remind me where we are.
We're at the top of page 2, Babylonian Talmud, Chulin 105a.
Okay, got it. All right, ready?
Mm-hmm.
Rav Asi posed a dilemma to Rabbi Yochanan. How much time should one wait between eating meat and eating cheese? Rabbi Yochanan said to him, no time at all. The Gemara asks, is that so? But doesn't Rav Hista say, if one ate meat, it is prohibited for him to eat cheese immediately? But if he ate cheese, it is permitted for him to eat meat without delay. Rather, Rav Asi actually asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question. How much time should one wait between eating cheese and eating meat? In response to this question, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, no time at all. Marv Ukva said, I am, with regard to this matter, like vinegar, son of wine, with respect to father, i.e., my practice is inferior to that of my father. As father, if he were to eat meat at this time, would not eat cheese until tomorrow at this time. But as for me, only at this meal, during which I ate meat, do I not eat cheese. At a different meal on the same day, I will eat cheese.
Thank you, Audrey. Okay. Joel and Louise, is that a question, comment, or a willingness to read a text? Hand raise.
Willingness to read.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you. All right. So if you're gonna keep dairy and meat separate, the question naturally arises in the context of one's body. How is that separation achieved? And that's what this conversation now is all about. Because you could say, you might think, okay, I just had my corned beef sandwich. I finished it. It's off my plate. And now I'm going to go have some ice cream because I'm not eating these things together. And this became another really, really big question for the rabbis. Like, how do we make sure that these things don't even interact inside of our own physical beings? And it's interesting, this whole Rabbi Yochanan thing. This is what who was reading before, and I said, we were reading about Rabbi Yochanan. Oh, Kevin, it was you, I think. And Rabbi Yochanan is the one who interpreted the 3 times as this is for beasts, and this is for wild animals, and this is for fowl. So here he says, initially, you don't have to wait at all between the two, and the anonymous Gemara can't wrap probably his mind around it. He's like, but wait a minute, no, that can't be right because we have this whole teaching from Rav Chisda. So then the Gemara turns around and said, here's what he must have really asked. He must have asked, tell me about the wait time between eating dairy first and then meat, which may be different. And that's how he understands Rabbi Yochanan's answer. He said, oh, Rabbi Yochanan must have been talking about the wait time from dairy to meat, not from meat to dairy, because that's a whole different thing. And you have this Mar Ukva person whose father waited 24 hours in between. He was really strict. And Mar Ukva feels, he's down on himself because he only waits the time from one meal to the next. So again, kind of, to go back to Alan Fetterman's language, the sacredness of keeping meat and dairy separate gets taken to the next level in terms of how long do we wait between. Okay. Audrey.
So when I learned to keep kosher, and I was at a conservative synagogue, and my husband was from Orthodox synagogue, there was like different guidelines for, do you wait an hour? Do you wait 2 hours? Do you wait 3 hours? Different people did different things. But one of the things about meat and dairy was how long does it take to digest? And there was the sense that dairy digests easy, meat takes longer. So to me it's all about discipline and making an effort to not just eat, but to think about what you're eating. And it's like, realizing no one has the same standards, but there's an effort made to make eating this thought out thing as opposed to just doing it. That's it.
Yeah, right. And I'll just, thank you, Audrey, that's great. And I'll just add, especially eating animals, right? That really, from this perspective, that really requires intention and attention. Because it's a compromise with the ideal of veganism, because we are causing
death,
harm to another living being.
And in other religions, there's a lot of religions that some don't eat meat at all. And there's also the sense that, and we as a community think about, is eating meat had the same implications. I mean, I take it in a whole different way. Like, I want to feed the world. I don't want to just be eating vast amounts of meat, but that's kind of a whole different thing.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. Not tonight, but we're going to get there. Thank you for that. So we're going to move from the Talmud to a later kind of rabbinic text, which is a law code. In the early days of the Talmud, like we were talking about, every rabbi would make their own decision about, within certain parameters, about what the answer was to a question. Their constituents would ask them questions. They would go, they'd consult their sources. Probably most of their sources were probably other rabbis at the time, and they'd come back with an answer. But at some point, there was a sense that maybe there were a lot of people who were living in communities where there weren't learned rabbis, and they needed a resource that would tell them how to live. And it took a little while to reach this point of having a law code that was generally acceptable across the Jewish world. The first person who tried to do this was Maimonides, who was obviously a very, accomplished, intelligent rabbi, doctor, philosopher. He was a, polymath. And yet, when he wrote a book called the Mishneh Torah, which is like the second Torah. That's what it translates to. And he wrote it because he wanted people to know what to do in any given situation. That's what that book is all about. And it's all organized. And he goes through the whole Talmud, and he decides when there's a debate between rabbis, he makes the decision about what the right answer is, and he puts it in his book. And when he publishes this book, he gets absolutely slammed by the other rabbis for being arrogant. And who are you to make decisions for the entire Jewish people about what the law, what halacha says about this or that? So he was the first person to try to make a law code. That was like 12th century. And then a few centuries later, we've got this book called the Shulchan Aruch, the set table. And this book was put together actually by a guy who was a great mystic who lived in the city of Tzfat. We had the story about Tzfat. Bruce told us the story about Tzfat. So this rabbi lived in Tzfat. He was a mystic. He was he was a visionary, but he also was a Jewish law guy too. And he wrote this huge law code called the Shulchan Aruch, and it had also laws dealing with every area of Jewish life. In this law code, he sometimes gives alternate options based on different communities that he's aware of. And there's actually another rabbi, Yosef Karo was a Sephardic rabbi. Then there was a big Ashkenazic rabbi named Moshe Isserlis, and he wrote commentary on, or glosses on, each of the laws that Karo put. So he added the Ashkenazic, dimension to this law code. So most of the laws have you have Karo's voice telling you the Sephardic perspective, and then Isserlis adds the Ashkenazic. So now we're gonna see what this says about the whole thing about wait time between milk and meat that that we just read about in the Talmud, and we'll see if it's solidified in some way. Okay, Joel and or Louise.
All right. So from Shulchan Aruch, that one?
Yeah.
After eating meat, even from a wild animal or poultry, one should not eat cheese before an interval of 6 hours. And even after this interval, one must clean the teeth if there are meat remnants in the gaps. The interval must also be observed when one has chewed the meat to give it to a child. So gloss is like a commentary on that? Is that what
so
gloss
this is
means?
right. This is now the Ashkenazic commentary, right?
Okay. After cleaning the teeth, one must rinse the mouth before eating the cheese. Some opine that the 6-hour interval is not necessary, and one can eat the cheese after removing the dishes, reciting the blessing at the end of the meal, and cleaning and washing the mouth. In our countries, it is customary to wait 1 hour after the meat meal before eating the cheese, but the mentioned blessing must be recited because only then are the two meals distinct, otherwise not. It makes no difference if the hour serving as an interval is observed before or after the blessing. Meat remnants found in the gaps must be removed even after the interval.
Thank you. Thanks, Joel. Okay. So
do I understand he's saying you got 3 requirements and you can do them in any order? There's the 1 hour waiting. There's the saying the grace after meals.
Yeah.
And there's the cleaning the teeth. And apparently, as long as you've done all 3, it doesn't matter what order you do them.
I think that is what this is saying. I don't know if this was widely observed in the 16th century, but today, I know in the traditional community there is a high value placed on saying the blessing as soon as possible after you finish the meal. So but that might not be a requirement. But right, those are the three things that have to happen, and they are all required. You can't just wait an hour. You can't just clean your teeth or wash your mouth. I will say there is another opinion, and I don't know why I couldn't find it, but I know that there is an opinion that says no, that you don't have to wait at all. You just have to clean your teeth and wash your mouth and probably say the blessing. But you don't have to wait an hour. And that one never took hold in any communities as far as we know. So the shortest amount of time was the 1 hour, the 3 hour, and the 6 hour. And most people in the Ashkenazic world today, if they're traditionally observant, wait 6 hours. That's the most common, in my experience, the most common practice. Okay.
Rabbi,
sorry, go ahead.
So I was told 6 hours was prevalent in Eastern Europe, and 3 hours was prevalent in Central Europe, and 1 hour was prevalent in Western Europe. And of course, most, the largest population was in Eastern Europe. There was a period where 85% of Jews in the world were under the Polish Empire when it was at its biggest. So I think that might be why the 6 hours sort of took hold, because it had more people.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally right. Thank you. Allie.
Hey there.
Hi.
Hi. So I have an observation about what you just said, and then also about sorry, Leo's here too.
Hi, Leo.
And also that goes back to something that we were talking about before. So in the text that you read, it said something about like in our communities, and we're just talking about now in certain communities, it's a certain amount of time, right? Like 1 hour, 3 hours, 6 hours, right?
Right.
And so I think it's an interesting question about how much of this is based off of the community practice. And it goes back to the whole thing with the head of the peacock.
Yeah.
It sounds super fancy, right? And what was it that the guy was asking? Why did you not do what?
Why didn't you? Well, he asked him to. Why didn't you excommunicate? Why didn't you rebuke them? And excommunicate them? Like, they're doing something terribly wrong. Go ahead.
And what was the context that he ate this? He was traveling.
He was
right?
traveling, and he was in this part of the country where this one rabbi's teachings were the predominant teaching.
So I know a lot of this is the whole point of this is to be able to learn about the past and see it and see how much it's changed with our modern points of view. But I feel like it would be a real dick move to excommunicate someone who was hosting you for dinner and gave you fancy like peacock head. Like, is that part of it? Like, is there any like being a guest or being, you know what I mean? Like, is that what we're supposed to bring from that story? Is that we have to take the situation and the intention into account as well? Like, another thing is like, it's totally normal for us to wash our hands in front of each other. Like especially in more traditional settings, right? You wash your hands before the meal. That's part of it. And so I feel like brushing our teeth communally, like being at someone's house and being like, okay, dessert's coming on, let's all brush our teeth and eat meat, right? Like that would be weird to us, but it might not be weird back then, So I'm wondering if part of what this is telling us is how to take into account like cultural differences.
Yeah. I mean, that is certainly how I would like to read this story. I mean, I think, and the fact that the story ends like Levi doesn't then rush back to this part of the country after he has this conversation with Judah the prince and say, I'm sorry guys, but now I realize that I have to excommunicate you. Like, it ends with him responding to the question, why didn't you do this? And then he says why, and that's the end of the story. So yes, I agree with you. I think that is, to me, it's giving an emphasis, it's giving more weight to the position of this Levi person or Levi person, which is interesting because he's not even given the title of rabbi, and he's talking to the most respected rabbi of the day, and he is comfortable, like, pushing back a little bit, which is that, yes. So I think that's true. The other thing that, from what you brought up, Ali, I'll just share, is that there's a principle in the Talmud when rabbis are deciding what the practice is going to be. There are two things that relate to the communal, what the community is actually doing. So one principle is, if you're not sure what to do, go out and see what the people are doing, and then make that the law. In other words, what's already going on. And the other one is, if you have a decision that you or other people think is going to be too burdensome for the community, you don't do it. You back off something that's going to be too burdensome. So the practice of the community is really a big deal in the decisions of, or it can be at least. Audrey.
I just want to point out that this is generally just about the Jewish community, and we live in a predominantly Christian and multicultural religious community.
Right.
So our context is much broader, and so I just want to point that out because mixing with other communities that are non-Jewish is a very different thing back then.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, Audrey. And many people have argued that one of the purposes of the laws, in addition to trying to get us to feel the power, the impact of taking another life in order to nourish ourselves, was also to keep separate the Jewish community and other non-Jewish communities that might be around. So that, and it was very effective at that, because you couldn't eat at a non-Jewish person's house if you followed these laws at all. And so, yeah. And that's, now you could theoretically have non-Jews come over to your house, but that it wasn't, most of the time that wasn't what was happening between the Jewish community and other communities that they might live in proximity to. Alan.
Well, that brings up another point, and that is that if these laws, many of them were created in a sense to separate Jews from the rest of the society, then it seems like the ultra-Orthodox community is certainly following that kind of rule of thumb today. And it also creates a terrible backlash. Do you know what I mean? It creates us as a separate people who are different from the rest of the society, and hence we become the foreigner wherever we go.
So, I think that was, I imagine, Audrey, that was kind of part of what you were getting at. I will say, personally, I don't think that is the core purpose. I think that if at best that's a secondary purpose, but because I think there are people who, try to observe some of these traditional practices in some way, but also are very committed to being connected to people outside of the Jewish community. Right,
May I
yeah,
say one thing?
yeah,
My main point is that when we think about these, is your context the general community in which you live, or is your context within a Jewish community? Not that you're not with different groups of people. It's that if you're trying to get along with non-Jews who eat cheeseburgers all the time, then it's a whole different thing whether you feel comfortable. I mean, it's like people who decide to be vegetarian. I'm vegetarian, and you're comfortable saying that to people. My grandfather was vegetarian, for example.
oh, wow.
So to me, there's just it's an element of how far where you are, and I just want the context to be clear. Are you putting it with you want to be comfortable all the time with all people, and you want them to be all the time comfortable with you, or do you have different levels? And because I'm kind of semi-vegetarian, I'm very used to the fact of distinguishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Audrey. I would say, I mean, we inherently will look at it from this multicultural perspective. I mean, in the universe that the rabbis lived in, that for the most part wasn't their experience. So that's what they're talking about. But I think ultimately, as we kind of digest this and reflect on it and think about, to what extent it is useful to us and meaningful to us, I think we think about it in both ways, because we think about it in terms of being, we are a community in which, members have different ways of relating to food, some of which are traditionally Jewish and some of them aren't. And then we also live within a broader community, and I think both of those things are relevant. Thank you. Julia.
Yeah, just because Alan's comment, I don't think this was created to separate us. I think that this worked because we were separate. I think it functioned and created community in spaces where we were constantly pushed out and moving and had to create community wherever we were. And these were commonalities that existed and were able to perpetuate because the people of the time were forced to be together and live only among each other. I think if it was a more disparate community, if it was a more mixed community, then this wouldn't have flown. It wouldn't have worked.
Thank you, Julia. And it's probably true for other cultures, right? Where there are particular, I don't know. I don't know if this would be true for like Japanese culture, for example, but I know that there's a lot of I don't know how widespread the eating practices in Japan are, but I know they're very ritualized, at least sometimes, and it would be, I imagine, somewhat difficult for a Japanese person to live in a non-Japanese environment, and if they wanted to stay committed to, the extremely ritualized way of eating. But it's a dilemma. And the question is, can we draw out some spiritual inspiration, even if we're not gonna say we're gonna follow all of these things or any of them even, but if the spirit of these laws can be helpful to us at all. So thank you, everybody. All right, we're not going to read the bottom two texts on this page 2. Basically, they talk. This is an extension of the separation that talks about, using different knives to cut cheese and meat, using different pots to cook dairy and meat. So it's the development of this system of separation that some of us have seen in action in the modern world. And some of us may have even seen that in some traditional households, there are actually two separate kitchens. There's a dairy kitchen and there's a meat kitchen, and there's a dairy dishwasher and there's a meat dishwasher. And so people who live in those houses have it relatively easy because they know they just go to the right kitchen. But that's that. Okay. The page 3, I'm just going to walk through page 3 real quick. And these are all, I think, these are all attempts to come up with explanations for, or non-explanations for these practices, which the Torah never gives us an explicit reason for. Why this animal and not that animal? Why? What about? I mean, it does say something about the life force of the animal being in the blood, but the particular species, really nothing. And then later on, like, you have to slaughter the animal in a certain way. And anyway, so the first text, Babylonian Talmud Yoma, this talks about these two categories of Jewish laws that are called Chukim and Mishpatim. Chukim are laws, Mishpatim are laws that the rabbis believed any rational human society could come up with on their own without the need for any kind of special revelation. And Chukim were laws that rationality would never lead you to practice, but because we have a tradition and the belief was it was divinely revealed, those we just do them even if they don't make sense to us. Kashrut, especially the animals, the particular animals that are allowed and disallowed, is definitely in the category of Chukim. It's a law that is not, at least that's how a lot of rabbis saw it. Now, the next text from Midrash Tanhuma this is an amazing text. This is a 1,200-year-old text, and I think this is worth reading all the way through. What does the Blessed Holy One care whether one ritually slaughters cattle and eats the meat, or whether one slaughters cattle by stabbing it and then eats it? Will some such thing benefit God or cause God harm? Or what does God care whether one eats carcasses or eats what is clean? Solomon said about this, this quote is a little bit opaque to me, but if you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you will bear it alone. But then the punchline is, thus the commandments were given only to purify human beings through them. So for the author of this midrash, the practices are somewhat random. Who said this? Audrey said this before. It's about discipline, but this author would say there is no intrinsic meaning to the particulars, which is, that's a little strong in the other direction. But anyway, I just wanted you to be aware that was out there. Oh, shoot. I misordered this. The next text we're going to come back to. The bottom text from Maimonides. So Maimonides, he's always an outlier. He thought every commandment had a rational explanation. It's just that some of them we don't understand yet, but if we keep working at it, we'll come to a rational understanding. He didn't think there was any such thing as chukim, basically. He said everything is a mishpat, everything is a rational commandment, and we just may not have the information or the insight yet to see why. So, like cooking a kid in its mother's milk, what Lila said earlier, he theorized that was actually the main ritual in a pagan ceremony in the ancient Near East. and a very important ritual. And so by the Torah saying that was absolutely out of bounds, it was a way of, again, separating the Israelites from these other communities. So that's what he says. And then at the top of the next page is a tiny little commentary from the Kli Yakar. And this, he follows Nachmanides, another medieval commentator. And Nachmanides says, the other thing that Maimonides says is that the particular animals, it's all about physical health. Most other people did not say that, but Maimonides, he was a doctor, he believed that the kosher laws actually had health benefits, which has become a more modern kind of way of understanding them. But he was one of the few people in the ancient world who took that position. But then Nachmanides, his later contemporary by about 100 years, he said, no. It's not about, there's no physical health involved here. It's about the health of the soul, and that these animals that are allowed are supposed to be beneficial to our souls, and the ones that are forbidden are supposed to be destructive to our souls. So these are just a range of different interpretations of, like, can we understand them? And if we can, how? But maybe we can't. So just wanted you to be aware of that. All right, now, back on page 3, those 2 paragraphs in the middle from the Babylonian Talmud, this is a whole different track here. We also talked about the idea, I forgot to say this at the beginning. Last week we talked about this law of blessing, that when you come into the land, the Torah has this line that says you will eat and you will be satisfied and you will bless God for the good land that God has brought you into. Just one verse. Maybe not even a whole verse, maybe a partial verse. So based on that line, the rabbis, again, kind of really expanded it significantly. And these 2 paragraphs, they created this very extensive blessing after you have a meal, after we have a meal. Some of us have probably said part or all of it at various moments. And it's sung, at least the way most people do it today. It's sung as opposed to read. And there's a paragraph. There's a paragraph for the food. There's a paragraph for the land. There's a paragraph for Jerusalem. And there's a paragraph for praising God who does good. And the rabbis believe that they can hook each of those paragraphs to a particular word in that original biblical verse that we talked about. So the idea, I just wanted to say, and maybe we'll talk about this more at another time, but it's interesting that the blessing, I think blessing food, that's like that's an intuitively meaningful thing to do. To take a step back and appreciate, I just got to eat a meal. And but then the fact that the content of the blessing isn't just about the food, it's a bigger vision than that. It kind of like, in a way, the blessing after the meal, you could say, is a little bit of a vision statement of the Jewish people that is repeated in traditional communities multiple times a day. You talk about gratitude for the food, you talk about the sacredness of the land, and you talk about the goodness of the divine. And so anyway, it's just an expansion of what a blessing can be. It can be anchored in the experience of eating, and then maybe there are other levels. I mean, that's certainly true on Passover, right? We have the raw experience of eating the food, but then it's supposed to help us connect with a larger vision, a larger experience. So anyway, these 2 paragraphs describe an early version of what's called the Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after a meal, which again the rabbis saw as being a biblical commandment. Okay, we're on the last page. I'm sorry, I'm just going fast here because I want to try to end. We didn't end on time last week. I want to try to respect everybody's time here. Psalm 24:1. Does everybody see where that is on the last page? It's just a line. It's the second text on the last page. The earth is God's and all that it holds, the world and its inhabitants. Okay, it's a line from a psalm that says everything belongs to God. That's not an outlying idea. It's, a lot of religions say that. It's a very common idea in lots of, especially Western religion. So then we have this quote from Rav Yehuda in the Babylonian Talmud, who says, if you get benefit from this world without saying a blessing, it's as if we've enjoyed objects that were consecrated to the heavens or to the divine. As it says in the Bible, the earth and all it contains is the Lord's, the world and all those who live in it. So that is, and this is talking about saying a blessing before we eat, not a blessing after. So that's, the biblical command is the blessing after. That's all that it talks about. But here, the rabbi is saying, if we don't say a blessing, it's almost like we're taking something that doesn't belong to us. Then Rabbi Levi says, but wait a minute. One verse says, the earth is the Lord's and all it contains. But elsewhere, in a different psalm, there's a line that says, the heavens are the Lord's, but the earth God gave to human beings. Seems like a contradiction, right? And so then he says, well, it's not a contradiction, and this is kind of a clever interpretation. He says, everything belongs to God before you say the blessing, but after you say the blessing, then it belongs to human beings. So that's how he handles that, the contradiction in the text. But the idea of saying a blessing, feeling gratitude both before and after the experience of eating. Okay. The next paragraph, the next text is from the Mishnah, and it talks about just different blessings that people say over different categories of food. This is something we know, we say the hamotzi every Shabbat, right? Well, that comes out of this text. Where the rabbis say, well, what blessings do we say over this food? What blessings do we say over that food? And that's in response to this idea that we should say blessings over things. We should, because it can help us. It can, I would say, in kind of a modern mode, it can raise our consciousness about the experience rather than doing something just mindlessly. It's about mindfulness, I think. So there are different blessings over different categories. There's some, tree fruit has their own blessing, except you would, grapes are an interesting category because grapes, you would think they get the blessing over wine, but they don't. They get the blessing over tree fruit. Then there are fruits that grow from the ground. They have their own blessing. Bread has its own blessing. And then there's one over herbs and leafy vegetables. It's the same blessing as you say over vegetables that grow out of the ground. So anyway, just that this tradition of saying blessings goes back to, rabbinic times. Okay, we're going to end on time. The next text is about Passover. And it's about the Seder. And I think this Passover Seder is a great example of using food in a sacred way. So this just describes some of the food on the Seder plate. And again, this is from the Mishnah. This is like 1,800 years old. So the Seder plate goes way back, and probably, again, was probably in use even when the second temple was still standing. It's been around for a long time. So this idea of food having a symbolic role, and the experience of eating certain foods as being meant to bring a certain awareness and a certain focus to our experience of eating. So lastly, these two Talmudic quotes I thought were really nice in terms of overarchingly conveying something about the spirituality of food in the Talmud. There is no complete rejoicing without eating and drinking. So food and drink are an essential part of bringing joy into people's lives. That's part of, people joke about how much Jewish culture focuses on food, but it is in its original context, it has this connection to joy. I don't know that that's very conscious for us as we're doing our eating in various contexts. But and then the second one, giving hospitality to guests is greater than receiving the divine presence. So that's also a big statement, that if we like Abraham and Sarah, if we are helping people, if we are hosting people, if we are giving people nourishment, according to this text, that is higher than like encountering the divine. I love that. So that's a sacred use of food to bring comfort and strength and to other people. So I'm going to stop, and if anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to stay on. And if anyone else, and otherwise, we are going to formally conclude this session. So if you feel free to go, and everyone certainly should feel free to go. But if there's anything and if you think about it afterwards, feel free to send an email, and I'm happy to kind of start the next session, which is going to be medieval into modern times. So thank you. Yeah, Kevin?
We often say that something like Jews keep the Sabbath, but the Sabbath keeps the Jews.
Yes.
And I'm feeling the same way about kashrut. And as someone remarked, if Jews wanted to keep kashrut, they had to form a community. So as much as the community uses kashrut, kashrut makes the community.
I'm sure it functions that way for a lot of people. Absolutely. The reality, I think, in our world is that many of these practices are not easy. Don't feel easily accessible to people as a meaningful way of, in terms of the kind of the sacred spiritual piece. The cultural, sociological, that kashrut and Shabbat keep the Jewish community together. That is, I think that's right. But when we're living in a time where those things are, in terms of, if we went out and looked, what is the community doing? Our communities are not keeping Shabbat in the way that it was kept, in the medieval Jewish towns, or keeping kosher, and is there a way to, for, and which is not to say that I think it can be very meaningful, but for a lot of people, it's difficult to get to that point. So I think, yeah, go ahead, Julia.
I think also that sometimes that becomes like a sense of competition or righteousness, and that like whoever keeps the rules the most is the most Jewish or the best Jew. And that I think is so dangerous for our community to, I don't think we do that. I just think dangerous our community as a whole, where yes, these kashrut rules keep Jews, but also it's not what makes us who we are. And there's room for adjusting, and there's room for different interpretations, and there's room for everybody to find what's meaningful to them too.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we get to the second half of next week and then the final week, we're really going to look at several modern attempts to like reframe the whole meaning of kashrut in a way that can really, it grows more organically out of the experience of lots of liberal Jews today. Audrey.
Wrap up.
I
think what's wonderful is that we're having this course and talking about it, because what I find most difficult about kashrut is people's having a hard time just talking about it, because people are at different levels. And it's like whenever I can talk to somebody and just say, this is what I do, what do you do, how can we do this? That to me is the most important part, and that's Reconstructionist. And so I really appreciate this course and this opportunity to share and get more comfortable with discussing.
Thank you, Audrey. Right. I'll just underscore that in my ideal of our community, everyone recognizes that people, like Audrey said, are in, different places, and we have conversations, about like what works within your system, what works within my system. And there isn't a presumption that everyone has to be doing the same thing. And there's a recognition that there's just a mutual learning that's a part of being together Jewishly in the community. And again, across a wide range. Yeah.
And some flexibility as opposed to
And some flexibility.
rigidity.
Yeah. Maybe lots of flexibility. So, okay. All right. Alan Fetterman, thank you for Zoom hosting. And our next session is a week from tonight, right? I think that's right. 1 week from tonight. And then we have a little bit of a gap. I think we have about 2 weeks after next week before we do session 4. It's going to be on a Sunday. So I'll look forward to seeing you next week, and hopefully maybe even before then. Have a good night, everybody. Stay warm. The 20 and 30 degree weather is on its way. Going to see it soon.
Steve.
All right. Okay. Have a good night. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.